Carl Jung spent decades studying human consciousness, and what he discovered should fundamentally change how you see yourself. According to his research, there exists a personality type so rare that fewer than 1 in 20 people will ever develop it. Jung called this differentiated consciousness, a way of perceiving reality that most humans never even approach. But here's what makes this discovery so unsettling. The people who possess these traits almost always believe something is deeply wrong with them. Jung documented case after case of individuals with extraordinary psychological depth who had been conditioned to see their intensity, their sensitivity, and their refusal to accept superficial explanations as personal defects rather than signs of advanced mental architecture. And the part that modern psychology still struggles to accept? Carl Jung believed these rare individuals weren't just different. They represented humanity's evolutionary edge, the next stage of conscious development. So if you've spent your life feeling like you don't quite fit, if people have told you repeatedly that you're too intense, too sensitive, too complicated, what you're about to discover will reframe everything. Because according to Jung's findings, you're not too much for this world. The world simply hasn't caught up to you yet. The traits that made you feel like an outsider aren't flaws. They're psychological upgrades. You're not broken. You're breaking through. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. But what happens when who you are doesn't conform to society's narrow definitions of normal? What if your intensity, your depth, your refusal to accept surface-level existence aren't weaknesses but evidence of what Jung called advanced psychological architecture? Consider this from an evolutionary lens. Throughout history, the individuals who pushed humanity forward were always the ones who couldn't accept the status quo. They questioned relentlessly. They felt deeply. They perceived possibilities invisible to everyone else. And yet society continues teaching these exceptional individuals to suppress their greatest strengths. You've been told you're too sensitive, too emotional, too serious, too analytical. But Carl Jung understood that these so-called defects are actually indicators of psychological differentiation, the rare capacity to perceive and process reality with an intensity and complexity that most people never cultivate. Modern neuroscience is beginning to validate this. Research shows that approximately 20% of the population experiences sensory and emotional input more intensely. But Jung pointed to something even rarer. He identified individuals whose entire psychological structure operates at an elevated level. And what's truly remarkable? These people often hide their gifts because they've been programmed to view them as burdens. You learn to dim your presence because others found it overwhelming. You learn to contract because your full expansion made people uncomfortable. So let's reveal these 8 signs, starting with the first. Sign 1. You experience emotional depth that feels almost supernatural. Carl Jung discovered something extraordinary about emotional intensity. He found that certain individuals don't simply feel emotions. They experience what he termed affect-toned complexes, emotional currents that carry multiple layers of meaning, insight, and psychological resonance simultaneously. You don't just have emotions. Emotions move through you like symphonies, each note carrying information most people never register. You feel the tension in a room before anyone speaks. You sense the hidden intentions beneath people's words without needing explanation. And here's what Carl Jung understood that most therapists still overlook. This isn't emotional volatility. This is emotional intelligence operating at advanced levels. When you feel deeply, you're not overreacting. You're accessing what Jung called the objective psyche, the deeper strata of human experience that most people have disconnected from through years of social conditioning. For you, everything contains data. Every subtle irritation, every tonal shift, every micro-expression becomes a doorway into understanding yourself and others at an entirely different frequency. According to Jung, this capacity isn't a burden to manage. It's a gift to refine. But the world taught you otherwise, and that programming created years of unnecessary suffering. Sign 2. You question reality with sacred curiosity. Most people live what Carl Jung described as unconscious lives. They follow mental programming they never examine, adopting beliefs, habits, and social rules inherited from others without investigation. But you cannot stop questioning. You don't just want answers. You demand truth. Jung would identify you as someone with a highly active thinking function, a mind structured to excavate layers beneath surface appearances. You don't merely ask what happened. You ask why it happens, what it means, and what possibilities it reveals. Why do people tolerate relationships that diminish them? Why do we accept systems designed to crush human potential? Why do we mistake shallow interaction for genuine connection? Carl Jung called this capacity the transcendent function, the ability to see beyond current limitations and hold multiple layers of truth simultaneously without collapsing into binary thinking. But here's the cost of sacred curiosity that Jung recognized. Your questions threaten the illusions keeping others comfortable. People who've stopped growing often feel attacked by your very existence. They label you as too much, too intense, too analytical simply because your inquiries disrupt their psychological comfort zones. If you've been told you think too deeply, understand this. It's not criticism. It's confirmation. Sign 3. You've developed conscious independence. Carl Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Rare personalities learn this early, usually because circumstances force them to. According to Jung's observations, many rare individuals develop what he called individuated consciousness earlier than the general population, often catalyzed by adversity, isolation, or chronic misunderstanding. People assume your independence is defensive armor. It isn't. It's achievement. You learned early that depending on external validation for your sense of self is psychological quicksand. You constructed your identity from the inside out. You stood up, frequently alone, and built a sense of self that cannot be destroyed by someone else's disapproval, absence, or misinterpretation. This process is what Carl Jung called individuation, the lifelong journey toward inner wholeness. Most people avoid it because it requires confronting their shadow material, the rejected and repressed aspects of themselves. But you pushed through that discomfort and found clarity on the other side. Your solitude isn't loneliness. Your solitude is sovereignty. Sign 4. You possess hyperperceptive awareness. Carl Jung revolutionized psychology by recognizing intuition as a legitimate psychological function. He described it as perception via the unconscious, the capacity to detect patterns and possibilities before they emerge into conscious awareness. You don't just observe people. You read them at levels they don't read themselves. You notice micro-expressions, energy fluctuations, tensions simmering beneath polished surfaces, the meanings hidden in silences. You see the story behind the behavior. You hear the truth behind the performance. This isn't paranoia or overthinking. This is psychological sensitivity operating at frequencies most people cannot access. But Carl Jung warned about something critical. If you don't protect this sensitivity with boundaries, you will burn out. You become the emotional regulator for everyone around you. You become the unpaid therapist in every space you enter. You absorb burdens that don't belong to you. According to Jung, highly perceptive individuals must develop what he called psychological discrimination, the ability to discern who deserves access to your depth and who is simply extracting your energy without reciprocation. Sign 5. You crave meaning above everything. Carl Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are, but only rare individuals actually live that truth. Your psyche fundamentally rejects inauthenticity. It won't allow you to pretend. You cannot perform for external approval. You cannot participate in conversations devoid of substance. You cannot pursue goals that lack soul. Your psychological makeup demands depth, alignment, and authenticity as baseline requirements. But Carl Jung discovered something even more fascinating about people who prioritize meaning. They often become what he termed evolutionary catalysts. When you refuse to live a shallow existence, you unconsciously force others to confront their own inauthenticity. Your presence alone functions as a mirror. It exposes what people have been avoiding within themselves. And sometimes they resent you for it. But they don't actually resent you. They resent the truth your existence reflects back at them. According to Jung, this dynamic explains why authenticity often creates distance. Not because authentic people are difficult, but because authenticity threatens the false structures others have built their identities upon. Sign 6. You've outgrown people and environments repeatedly. Carl Jung once wrote that the greatest tragedy of a family is the unlived lives of the parents. But what happens when you refuse to live an unlived life? What happens when you choose authenticity over tradition, expansion over comfort, truth over belonging. You grow, and when you grow, you shed. Jung called this process psychological death and rebirth, the shedding of identities that no longer serve and the emergence of a more aligned self. Rare individuals cycle through this process more frequently than most. Because while others cling to familiarity out of fear, you move toward transformation out of necessity. This means you've probably experienced something difficult. People who once knew you don't recognize you anymore. And it's not because you became difficult or distant. It's because you outgrew the version of yourself they were comfortable with. When you were contracting, they understood you. When you were people-pleasing, they liked you. When you suppressed your truth, they accepted you. But the moment you expanded authentically and unapologetically, you disrupted the roles they expected you to perform. And here's where Carl Jung's insight becomes crucial. Psychological evolution is irreversible. Once you awaken, you cannot return to unconsciousness. You cannot unknow what you've discovered. You cannot unsee what you've witnessed. You cannot shrink back into spaces that require disconnection from your soul. If people keep saying you've changed, the truth is simpler. You've stopped dimming your light, and they're not accustomed to seeing you fully illuminated. Sign 7. You create transformational presence. Carl Jung once said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there's any reaction, both are transformed. But what if you're the type of person whose presence consistently initiates transformation, even without intention? Jung identified a rare psychological capacity he called holding space, the ability to be so present, so authentic, so deeply attentive that people feel safe enough to reveal truths they've never spoken aloud. You don't force change. Your authenticity activates it. When people talk to you, they feel seen. Not judged, not analyzed, not fixed. Seen. You don't listen to respond. You listen to understand the parts of them they've never understood themselves. You detect what their words are trying to conceal. You catch the tremor in their voice before they register it. You sense what they cannot articulate. And because of this, something profound happens. People transform in your presence. But there's a hidden cost that Carl Jung warned about. People with this gift often become emotional anchors for everyone else. They hold space so naturally that no one thinks to hold space for them. Jung called this helper syndrome, an unconscious pattern where rare individuals sacrifice their own emotional needs because they're so practiced at carrying everyone else's weight. The solution isn't stopping your care. The solution is discernment. You must learn who deserves access to your transformational presence, because not everyone does. Sign 8. You sense a purpose you can't fully define yet. Carl Jung said your vision becomes clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakens? And you've been awakening for longer than you realize. Even if your life doesn't feel figured out, there's a quiet knowing inside you, a sense that you're meant for something beyond the ordinary, something only you can bring into the world. Jung described this as the transcendent function, the inner drive toward individuation and purpose. For rare personalities, this sense of calling can feel simultaneously inspiring and frustrating. You feel pulled towards something meaningful, even when you don't know exactly what it is yet. But here's the important truth Carl Jung discovered. Your purpose isn't random. Your purpose isn't vague. Your purpose is potential seeking expression through you. And when people like you ignore this calling, they don't just feel dissatisfied. They develop symptoms: anxiety, depression, a pervading sense of meaninglessness. Jung explained that living misaligned with your psychological type creates inner conflict that no external achievement can resolve. This purpose you feel isn't about fame or recognition. It's about alignment, living in harmony with your deepest nature. Carl Jung identified distinct stages that rare individuals move through. Understanding these stages helps you locate where you are in your own evolution. Stage 1 is the unconscious outsider. You feel different, but you don't understand why. Your traits feel like defects. You try desperately to fit in. You attempt to be normal. And the harder you try, the more disconnected you feel from yourself. Jung observed that people in this stage often develop what he called persona rigidity. They construct a mask so polished, so socially acceptable, that they lose contact with their authentic identity. You might have found yourself exhausted, anxious, chronically misunderstood, or hiding the most compelling parts of who you are. Stage 2 is the awakening individual. This is when you begin seeing your traits as gifts instead of burdens. You start understanding Jung's concept of psychological types, and finally you see where you belong. You begin shadow integration, the process of reclaiming the parts of yourself you were taught to reject. You stop apologizing for your depth. You stop tolerating relationships without substance. You stop allowing others to diminish your light. This is the stage where you begin choosing yourself. Stage 3 is individuated consciousness. Now you fully integrate your rare traits into a stable, coherent identity. You know who you are. You know what matters. You know what you're here to do. You've achieved what Carl Jung called psychological wholeness, the ability to express your authentic self while remaining connected to the world. At this stage, you become a beacon not through effort, but through embodiment. Your authenticity gives others permission to be authentic. Your clarity helps others find their own. Your depth invites others to go deeper. You become a catalyst for collective growth simply by being who you are. But Carl Jung also issued a warning. The more evolved the personality, the more dangerous its shadow. Even the rarest, most psychologically advanced individuals carry unconscious patterns that can trap them. First is the superiority shadow. This is when your rarity makes you feel above others. Jung warned this leads to arrogance, isolation, and what he termed psychological inflation, the belief that rarity equals superiority. It doesn't. It equals responsibility. Second is the messianic shadow. This is believing it's your duty to save everyone around you. Carl Jung saw this as a direct path to burnout, resentment, and emotional exhaustion. You're here to inspire, not rescue. To guide, not carry. Third is the martyrdom shadow. This is the belief that being rare means being destined to suffer, that your depth requires sacrificing happiness, comfort, or connection. It's false. Your rarity isn't meant to imprison you. It's meant to liberate you. Jung also identified 3 relationship types that rare individuals encounter. First are the energy vampires. These are people who crave your depth, but cannot reciprocate it. This dynamic drains rare individuals because you end up overfunctioning while they underfunction. Second are the light dimmers. These are people threatened by your depth. Your authenticity makes them uncomfortable because it exposes their own inauthenticity. They constantly tell you to tone it down, be more normal, not be so intense. To them, your fullness feels threatening. Third are the light matchers. These are the rare ones. The people who've done their own inner work. They don't need to feed on your energy or dim your light. They meet you at your depth. They match your honesty. They understand your intensity because they carry their own. Carl Jung believed that rare individuals thrive only when surrounded by people who possess psychological sovereignty, those grounded in themselves and unthreatened by authenticity. Carl Jung believed that with rare psychological architecture comes responsibility. You're not just different for your own benefit. You're different in service of something larger. He wrote that individuals with advanced consciousness act as bridges between the unconscious and the conscious. Through your depth, your questions, your refusal to accept shallow answers, you help humanity evolve. This is why you can't tolerate superficial conversations. You can't stand manipulative dynamics. You can't settle for relationships without depth. You can't accept systems that crush human spirit. Your psyche isn't being dramatic. It's being evolutionary. You were designed to see what others ignore, to question what others accept, to feel what others suppress, to grow where others remain comfortable. Your dissatisfaction isn't failure. It's guidance. But Jung issued one final warning for rare personalities. The danger of believing rarity means superiority. This is what he called psychological inflation, when a person identifies too strongly with their gifts and loses humility. True psychological rarity holds both truths simultaneously. You are special. Others are not less valuable. Your sensitivity is intelligence, not a flaw. Your intensity is power, not a problem. Your depth is clarity, not inconvenience. Your independence is sovereignty, not isolation. Holding your gifts with humility is what allows them to flourish. Carl Jung believed that as humanity evolves, more people will develop these rare traits. What is extraordinary today will be normal tomorrow. What is rare now will become foundational to the next stage of human consciousness. This means something profound. You're not just personally rare. You're evolutionarily significant. You represent what Jung called the leading edge of consciousness. You are what humanity is becoming. That means your struggles weren't meaningless. Your loneliness wasn't random. Your sensitivity wasn't an error. Your intensity wasn't wrong. Every time you felt like an outsider, you were simply ahead of your time. Every time people criticized you for being too much, you were threatening their limited worldview. Every time you chose authenticity over acceptance, you expanded what's possible for human connection. Every time you refused to settle for shallow meaning, you raised the standard for what a meaningful life can be. Carl Jung believed that psychological evolution happens through individuals like you. Those who push against the boundaries of what's considered normal. Those who refuse to shrink. Those who question everything others blindly follow. You aren't just living your story. You are expanding what it means to be human. This journey comes with loneliness. It comes with misunderstanding. It comes with responsibility. But Jung's final insight is perhaps the most liberating. You must learn to love your rarity without needing anyone else to understand it. You're not here to convince others of your value. You're here to embody it. You're not here to make people see your light. You're here to shine it. Some people will never understand your depth. Some will be intimidated by your questions. Some will try to shrink your intensity. Some will misinterpret your sensitivity. But Carl Jung found that people who fully embrace their rarity eventually become magnets for others ready to awaken their own. You don't need everyone. You need the few who can match your consciousness. And together you build a life that feels like truth. Your work isn't to shrink. It's to evolve. The world needs your questions. The world needs your depth. The world needs your refusal to settle. The world needs your authenticity. But you must give these gifts consciously, strategically, sustainably. You must be both powerful and protected, both open and discerning. Carl Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But you're doing exactly that. And when you do, you give others permission to accept themselves too. Your intensity is not too much. It is exactly what the world needs to wake up. Your sensitivity is not weakness. It is advanced perception. Your depth is not a burden. It is a gift. Your rarity is not a curse. It is your power. Carl Jung dedicated his entire life to understanding people like you because he knew one thing. You are not here to fit in. You are here to evolve the world forward. The world doesn't need you smaller or quieter or easier. The world needs you fully expressed, fully awakened, fully rare. Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it. And if you'd like to go a step further in supporting this work, you can now leave a super thanks below. It's a small way to say thank you, and it truly helps keep this channel going.